Margaret Maggie Thorne had built two legacies. The first was a modest, family-run winery, Thorne Vineyards, known for its robust Cabernet. The second was her family. After her husband passed, she poured everything into both, especially her daughter, Chloe. Chloe was her sunshine, her pride. So when she announced her engagement to the charming and ambitious Alexander Sterling, Maggie was overjoyed. Alex was handsome, successful in finance, and seemed to dote on Chloe. He quickly integrated himself into the family, even offering to help modernize the winery's finances. Grateful and trusting, Maggie gave him access to everything. The rehearsal dinner was a beautiful event under the strings of lights in the vineyard. As glasses of their finest vintage were raised for toasts, Alex stood up, beaming. He spoke of love, of future, and then in a shocking pivot made a surprise announcement. With Maggie looking to retire, he said, his arm tight around a confused Chloe, we have exciting news. Sterling Ventures is acquiring Thorne Vineyards, will be expanding, rebranding, and finally making this place profitable. The table fell silent. Maggie's blood ran cold. She had never agreed to sell. This was a hostile takeover, orchestrated by the man about to marry her daughter. She saw the triumphant glint in his eye. He wasn't just marrying Chloe. He was acquiring the asset he'd always wanted. When Maggie tried to speak, Chloe, flustered and embarrassed, shushed her. Mom, not now, don't ruin this for us. The next 24 hours were a blur of despair. Her own daughter had chosen him. She was about to lose everything. The wedding day arrived. The ceremony was to be held in the vineyard itself, at the very heart of the estate Alex was stealing. As Chloe walked down the aisle, radiant, Maggie's heart broke. The priest reached the pivotal moment. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be lawfully joined, it was now or never. I do. A gasp rippled through the guests. All heads turned to Maggie. She stood, her voice not shaking, but clear and cold as ice. Alexander Sterling, she said, walking slowly towards the altar, is not who he says he is. She turned to the stunned crowd. His name is Alexander Burns. His company, Sterling Ventures, is a shell, funded by the embezzlement he has been slowly conducting from my books for the last year. Alex's face went from smug to ashen. She's lying. She's a bitter old woman who doesn't want to let go. Maggie didn't even look at him. She held up a small, wireless speaker. I had my suspicions months ago, I just needed proof. She pressed play on her phone. A recorded conversation filled the air, Alex's voice crisp and clear, talking to a business partner. Once I'm married to the daughter, the old lady won't have a leg to stand on. The prenup is ironclad for her assets, but the winery will be mine to leverage. Then we dump the simpleton and sell the land to the developers. It's worth 10 times as much as the wine. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The recording was undeniable. Maggie finally turned to Alex. You didn't just want to marry into this family. You wanted to bury it. You sold my home, my legacy, and my daughter's future to the highest bidder before you even said, I do. The wedding was over. Chaos erupted. Alex was led away by police officers who had been waiting discreetly at Maggie's request. Later, in the ruined aftermath of the wedding, amidst the overturned chairs and discarded flowers, Chloe, still in her wedding dress, found her mother. Tears streamed down her face. Mom, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I just loved him. Maggie opened her arms. I know, my sunshine, I know. Some vines need a harsh pruning to bear the best fruit next season. Our family is one of them. She had not just ruined a wedding. She had saved her daughter and reclaimed the roots of their legacy, which were now stronger and more valuable than ever. The silence that settled over Thorne Vineyards in the days following the aborted wedding was heavier than any winter snow. The festive lights were taken down, their cheerful glow a mocking memory. The rows of grapevines, once a symbol of growth and future vintages, now felt like silent witnesses to a family's near destruction. Maggie Thorne moved through it all with a weary sense of purpose. The initial euphoria of her victory had faded, replaced by the profound and aching reality of what had been broken. She had saved her daughter from a monster, but in the process, the trust between them had been shattered as completely as a wine glass on the stone patio. Chloe retreated into the main house, a ghost in her own home. The beautiful wedding dress was stuffed into the back of a closet, a symbol of her shame and gullibility. She couldn't look her mother in the eye. Her embarrassment was a palpable force, a wall built from her own self-recrimination. Maggie gave her space, her heart breaking a little more each time she passed her daughter's closed door. She had exposed Alexander to save Chloe, but the revelation had also exposed Chloe's poor judgment to the entire world. The healing, Maggie knew, would be a slower, more delicate process than the confrontation. The legal and financial machinations began immediately. Alexander Burns, now facing charges of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted grand larceny, saw his house of cards collapse with breathtaking speed. His assets were frozen. The shady development deal he had brokered for the vineyard land was null and void, the contracts rendered worthless by the illegal means used to acquire them. Maggie's lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Shaw, worked with the precision of a master surgeon, meticulously disentangling Alexander's financial webs from the vineyard's accounts. It was a long and tedious process, but with every recovered dollar and every nullified contract, Maggie felt a piece of her legacy being restored. But the vineyard itself was vulnerable. The scandal, splashed across local news, had scared off their regular distributors. Whispers of financial instability and family drama are poison in the wine business, where reputation is everything. The tasting room was empty. Orders were canceled. For the first time in decades, the future of Thorne Vineyards looked truly uncertain. Maggie had won the battle against the invader, but the war to save her home was just beginning. It was this palpable fear that finally forced a conversation. One evening, Maggie carried 2 glasses of their flagship Cabernet into the living room where Chloe was curled up, staring blankly at the fire. She set one glass on the table beside her daughter and sat in the opposite armchair. "We can't go on like this, Chloe," Maggie said, her voice soft but firm. "He has taken enough from us. He doesn't get to take our future, too." Chloe flinched but didn't look away from the flames. "How do I show my face in this town, Mom? Everyone knew, everyone saw. I was this close to marrying a con man." "You were in love with a carefully constructed illusion," Maggie corrected gently. "There is no shame in believing in the best of someone. The shame is entirely his for exploiting that." She then laid out the cold, hard truth about the vineyard's precarious state. She didn't do it to burden Chloe, but to include her, to make her a partner again, not a patient. "I stopped him, but I can't fix this alone. This winery, it was your father's dream and my life's work. But it has always been your inheritance. I need your help to save it, not as my heartbroken daughter, but as a thorn. We need to fight for this together." Something shifted in Chloe's eyes. The self-pity was burned away by a spark of defiance. The challenge, the call to arms, was a language she understood. It was the language of the vineyard, of battling frost and drought. She finally picked up the glass of wine, swirling the deep red liquid thoughtfully. "What do we do?" Chloe asked, her voice hoarse but clear for the first time in days. The plan was born that night, not from a place of revenge, but of resurrection. They decided to use their story not as a source of shame, but of strength. They would be transparent, vulnerable, and authentic. Chloe, harnessing a PR skill set Maggie never knew she had, and which she had perhaps naively used to promote Alexander, spearheaded the effort. She wrote a raw, honest blog post titled "The Vintage of Truth." She didn't paint herself as a victim, but as a woman who had been blinded by love and was now fiercely protecting her family's legacy. She wrote about the generations of Thorne women who had tended the vines, and she positioned the scandal not as their downfall, but as their most challenging harvest yet. They launched a limited edition wine. Maggie, with her deep knowledge, and Chloe, with her newfound voice, worked together to create it. They called it Phoenix Red, a bold, resilient blend. On the label was a simple, elegant drawing of a phoenix rising, its wings formed from grapevines. The story behind the wine was printed on a card attached to every bottle. The response was overwhelming. The local community, once buzzing with gossip, now rallied around them. Orders flooded in, not from giant distributors, but from individuals, small wine shops, and restaurants who believed in their story of resilience. The tasting room was soon busier than it had ever been, filled with people who came not just for wine, but for a connection to the family's courage. The final step in their healing came months later, on the eve of the harvest festival. The vineyard was thriving, the air sweet with the smell of ripe grapes. Chloe was outside, directing the setup of tables and lights, a healthy color back in her cheeks, her laughter once again ringing through the air. A car pulled up the long driveway. It was Thomas, Maggie's son and Chloe's brother. He had been conspicuously absent during the entire crisis, too wrapped up in his own life in the city to get involved in what he had once called Mom's rustic fantasy. He got out of his car, looking uncomfortable in his expensive city shoes on the gravel drive. He watched his sister, now confident and in charge, for a long moment. "Maggie," he said, finding his mother near the crush pad, "I saw the article in the Times about the Phoenix Red. Quite a comeback story." It's not a story, Thomas, Maggie said, wiping her hands on a towel. It's our life, he nodded, looking chastened. I should have been here. When Chloe called, I thought it was just more drama. I didn't realize how serious it was. I'm sorry. Maggie looked at her son, this man who valued spreadsheets over soil and saw not a villain but a stranger. The vineyard had never been his passion, but perhaps family could be. Apology accepted, she said. But apologies are like unsulfured wine, Thomas. They don't mean much if they don't change the way you behave. The harvest is next week. We need an extra pair of hands, not a financier's, a picker's. Thomas looked stunned, then glanced down at his pristine clothes. A long silence hung between them. Then slowly he nodded. All right, tell me what to do. He wouldn't stay. The city was in his blood. But for that 1 week, he would be part of the legacy he had always dismissed. It was a start. That night, as the sun set over the vines, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Maggie stood with Chloe on the porch. They clinked glasses of the first bottle of Phoenix Red from their very first barrel. We did it, Mom, Chloe said, her voice filled with pride and a hard-won strength. Maggie looked out at the land, the soil she had fought for, the daughter she had saved, the family she was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. No, my sunshine, she said, putting an arm around her. We're just beginning. The revenge had been a single, dramatic act, but the restoration of her family and her legacy was a slower, more beautiful vintage altogether, and it was finally ready to be uncorked. The success of the Phoenix Red was more than a financial reprieve. It was a profound emotional transfusion for Thorne Vineyards and the women who were its heart. The label, with its elegant phoenix woven from grapevines, became a symbol of resilience that resonated far beyond their local community. Orders poured in from across the country, each one a small victory, a validation of their struggle. The tasting room, once a place of quiet embarrassment, now hummed with energy. Visitors came not for schadenfreude, but for solidarity, to taste the wine with a story, to meet the mother and daughter who had stared down disaster. Maggie watched Chloe blossom in this new reality. The timid, heartbroken ghost was gone, replaced by a woman of steely determination and surprising business acumen. The crisis had sanded away her naivety, revealing a core of sharp intelligence and a deep, inherited connection to the land. Chloe took over the marketing and customer relations with a ferocity that left Maggie in awe. She leveraged their story with grace, never playing the victim, but always emphasizing their strength. She started a popular video blog, Vineyard Vignettes, which chronicled their daily life, the backbreaking work of pruning, the science of blending, the quiet magic of a sunset over the rows of grapes. She was no longer just the owner's daughter. She was the face of the vineyard's future. Yet, for all the outward success, a subtle tension began to weave itself into the fabric of their recovery. It was a tension born of generational shift and the unspoken weight of trauma. Maggie, the master vintner, the keeper of decades of institutional knowledge, operated on instinct honed by a lifetime of touch, taste, and observation. Her decisions were intuitive, a dance with nature. Chloe, forged in the fire of betrayal, sought control through data. She devoured soil analysis reports, invested in precision irrigation software, and wanted to experiment with new digital fermentation monitors. The old ways are romantic, Mom, but they're not efficient, Chloe argued one afternoon, her tablet held out like a shield. They were in the barrel room, the air thick with the scent of oak and aging wine. This system can regulate temperature to 1/10 of a degree. It can save us a whole percentage point of spoilage. That's thousands of dollars. Maggie ran a hand over the rough, familiar wood of a barrel holding their flagship Cabernet. Wine isn't made in a spreadsheet, Chloe. It's made here, she tapped the barrel. It's about listening to it. 1/10 of a degree can change the soul of the wine. You can't algorithm a soul. It was their first real clash since the wedding. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about philosophy. Maggie feared the heart of Thorne Vineyards. Its rustic, handcrafted authenticity was being slowly digitized into something sterile and corporate, echoing Alexander's ambitions in a different, more benign form. Chloe, terrified of ever being vulnerable again, saw data and control as their only armor against an unpredictable world. The tension found a focal point in a new project, the South Slope. This was a 5-acre parcel of land on the sunniest part of the property that had lain fallow for years. It was Maggie's dream project, the key to expanding their production without sacrificing quality. I want to plant it with Blauwfrankisch, Maggie announced, spreading an old, hand-drawn map of the property on the kitchen table. Chloe looked up from her laptop, frowning. Blau what? Mom, that's an obscure Austrian grape. It's a tough sell. The data shows consumer trends are leaning toward Provençal-style Rosés and lighter reds. We should plant a clone of Pinot Noir that's optimized for warm climates. The yield projections are more reliable. The world doesn't need another Pinot Noir clone, Maggie said, her voice firm. It needs character. Blaufränkisch has spice, acidity, a story. It's a risk, but it's our risk. Not the markets. The debate over the South Slope became a quiet war of wills. It was the embodiment of their struggle: tradition versus innovation, instinct versus analysis, heart versus head. The stalemate was broken by the arrival of a stranger. A car, dusty from the long gravel road, pulled up one Tuesday morning. A woman stepped out, perhaps in her late 60s, with a fierce, intelligent face and hands that spoke of a lifetime of physical work. She introduced herself as Elena Rosti, from a small, family-owned vineyard in the Piedmont region of Italy. "I have come," she said in a melodious accent, her eyes crinkling at the corners, "because of the phoenix." She held up a bottle of their wine. "A friend sent it to me. I tasted your story, and I taste potential and also fear." Intrigued, Maggie invited her in. Over a lunch of crusty bread, local cheese, and a bottle of their older vintage Cabernet, Elena spoke. Her family had faced a similar crisis years ago, nearly selling to a large conglomerate. They saved themselves not by rejecting the new, nor by clinging solely to the old, but by fusion. "You think it is a battle, Cara," Elena said, looking between Maggie and Chloe. "The old against the new, it is not. It is a blend like a great wine. The soil, the sun, the grape, these are the traditions, the soul, the technology," she shrugged. "It is just a new kind of barrel, a tool. It does not make the wine, it helps the wine make itself better." She pointed a finger at Chloe. "You are right to want control. The world is dangerous." She then turned to Maggie. "And you are right to protect the soul. Without it, you are just a factory." She proposed a solution, a partnership. Her vineyard would sponsor an intern, a young Italian winemaker trained in both Old World techniques and New World technology. They would come to Thorne Vineyards for a season to help them develop a hybrid approach for the South Slope. It was a brilliant, unexpected peace offering. Both Maggie and Chloe, humbled by Alina's wisdom, agreed. The intern, Luca, arrived a month later. He was young, energetic, and possessed a reverence for tradition that matched Maggie's and a fluency with technology that rivaled Chloe's. He didn't take sides, he translated. He showed Chloe how the soil moisture sensors could be used not to override instinct, but to inform it, to tell them exactly when the vines were asking for water. He showed Maggie how the digital fermentation monitors could give her a constant, precise readout of the wine's development, allowing her to make even more nuanced decisions than her palate alone might allow. Together, the three of them walked the South Slope. Luca took soil samples, not just for a lab, but to feel its texture, to smell its earthiness. He agreed with Maggie. "This soil, this sun, it has a voice. It wants to sing a spicy song." The Blaufränkisch, it is a good choice. But he also agreed with Chloe. "We can give it a head start. Drip irrigation to establish the roots, not to coddle them. Data to understand, not to control." The planting of the South Slope became a festival. They invited the community, their loyal customers, and even Thomas, who came for the weekend, looking distinctly out of place but willing to help. Under the bright spring sun, they planted the first of the Blaufränkisch vines by hand. Maggie and Chloe worked side by side, their earlier tension melting away in the shared, hopeful labor. It was a powerful image. The matriarch and the heir, planting the seeds of a future they would shape together, a blend of both their visions. That night, after everyone had left, Maggie and Chloe sat on the porch with a bottle of wine, looking out at the newly planted slope under the moonlight. "I was so scared of losing this," Maggie said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "Of losing you to a different kind of ghost. I was scared of losing it all over again," Chloe admitted. "I thought if I could just control everything, I could keep us safe." Maggie reached over and took her daughter's hand. "We can't control the frost, or the drought, or the mistakes we might make. We can only tend the vines as best we can and hope the vintage is a good one." The vineyard was saved, yes. But more importantly, the understanding between them was deepening, maturing like the wine in their barrels. The threat from Alexander had been a wildfire, devastating but clear. The challenge of building their future was more complex, a careful, continuous pruning and tending of their relationship. They had won the war against the outsider, and now they were learning the delicate art of peace with each other. The next vintage, they both knew, would be their truest collaboration yet. The victory over Blackthorn estates settled over Thorne Vineyards like a blessed, quiet rain after a long drought. It wasn't just a legal win, It was a profound affirmation. They had stood their ground, not with brute financial force, but with the sheer power of their story and the community that rallied to it. The vineyard, for the first time in years, felt truly, unassailably theirs. The name Thorne was no longer just a family identifier, it was a banner for resilience. This hard won peace allowed a new, softer reality to blossom. With the constant specter of crisis finally banished, the day to day rhythm of the vineyard took on a deeper, more satisfying cadence. The focus shifted from sheer survival to the art of cultivation, both of the grapes and of their lives. Daniel Rossi's presence became a permanent and grounding fixture. His courtship of Chloe was a steady, gentle process that Maggie observed with a heart full of cautious joy. He was not Alexander's flashy, dangerous charm. Daniel's love was evident in his actions. Fixing a stubborn irrigation pump without being asked, bringing Maggie a rare, out-of-print book on old-world viticulture he tracked down, sitting with Chloe for hours to discuss the nuances of their 5-year business plan. He respected Maggie's expertise and Chloe's vision, positioning himself not as a savior or a new owner, but as a partner and ally. One evening, as the three of them shared a bottle of wine on the porch, Daniel turned to Chloe, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been talking with my family," he began, his voice earnest. "The orchard in Napa, it's my legacy, like this is yours, but my heart isn't there anymore, it's here." He took her hand. "I want to sell my share to my cousins. I want to invest the capital here, in Thorne Vineyards, not as a silent partner, but as your viticulturist and operations manager. Officially." The proposal was perfect. It wasn't a romantic gesture made in the clouds. It was a practical, heartfelt business plan built on respect for their autonomy. He was investing in their dream, not asking them to join his. Maggie saw the rightness of it immediately. Chloe's answering smile, radiant and sure, said everything. The integration was seamless. Daniel's knowledge of soil science and canopy management complemented Maggie's instinctual touch. His calm, methodical nature balanced Chloe's fiery drive. The vineyard began to thrive with a new, unified purpose. The South Slope Blauwfränkisch vines, under their combined care, grew strong and healthy. It was during this period of tranquil growth that Chloe began to feel a different kind of change within herself. A lingering fatigue she attributed to the stress of the past year. A sudden aversion to the very smell of the fermentation cellar that had always been her comfort. A visit to the doctor confirmed what she had, in her heart, already begun to suspect. She was pregnant. The news sent a seismic wave of emotion through her, joy so profound it was dizzying, but also a sharp, slicing fear. The ghost of Alexander stirred. This child was his biological heir, a permanent tether to a man she loathed. Would the darkness of his legacy somehow touch her child? Could she love this baby unconditionally, without that shadow forever falling between them? She told Daniel first. His reaction was a balm. He took her face in his hands, his eyes shining with tears. "Chloe, look at me. This is our child, ours. His blood means nothing. His name means nothing. This baby will be a thorn. It will be a Rossi. It will be loved. That's the only legacy that matters." His certainty began to quiet the storm of her fear. Telling Maggie was a different experience. She expected joy, and she saw it, bright and immediate, in her mother's eyes. But beneath it, Maggie felt a complex rush of feelings she hadn't anticipated. A grandchild, the next generation. It was the ultimate affirmation of their survival, the ultimate promise for the future. But it also meant change. A profound, unstoppable shift in the vineyard's dynamics. Where would she fit? Would she become a footnote, the beloved grandmother who putters in the kitchen while the young ones run the show? The fear of being sidelined, of her hard-won authority gently fading into irrelevance, was a quiet, shameful whisper in her heart. She shoved it down, embracing Chloe fiercely. "This is the most wonderful news," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "A new little vine for our vineyard." The pregnancy became the new center of their world. Daniel was relentlessly protective and attentive. Maggie found herself poring over old family albums, remembering her own pregnancies, feeling a deep, primal connection to her daughter and the life growing within her. The vineyard's work continued, but now there was a new project. Converting a small, sun-drenched room next to theirs into a nursery. It was a tangible act of hope, of building a future. It was during this renovation that they made a discovery. Daniel was pulling up the old, worn floorboards to install insulation when his crowbar hit something hollow. Curious, he pried up a single board to reveal a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside, shielded from decades of dust, was a metal lockbox. They called Maggie in. The three of them sat on the floor of the half-finished nursery, the lockbox between them. It was rusted shut. With a few firm blows from a hammer, the latch broke open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were not jewels or deeds, but something far more valuable to a family like theirs. There was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a small, beautifully detailed leather-bound journal, and a single, folded piece of parchment. The letters were from Arthur Thorne to Maggie, written in the early, cash-strapped years of the Vineyard, when he'd had to take temporary work upstate. They were filled with longing, with dreams for their future, with sketches of trellis designs and baby names. They were a love story, a testament to the foundation upon which everything had been built. The journal was Arthur's. The first few pages were agronomic notes, but then it transitioned into something more personal. It was his diary during the first year of Maggie's pregnancy with Chloe. His fears, his hopes, his comical attempts to build a crib. One entry brought them all to tears. Maggie is convinced it's a girl. She says she'll have her fire. I hope she's right. I hope she has Maggie's strength and her own heart. This vineyard is for her. It's not just a business, it's a classroom. It's a playground, it's her inheritance. We might not leave her money, but we will leave her a world. A living, breathing, growing world. And that is worth more than all the gold in California. He had known. He had always seen the vineyard not as an asset, but as a legacy of love and learning. His words, hidden for decades, were a direct message to them to this moment. It was a benediction. Lastly, they unfolded the parchment. It was a map, drawn in Arthur's precise hand. It was a detailed layout of the entire property, but with one startling addition. In the farthest corner of the land, a section that had always been considered too rocky and poor for planting, he had drawn a circle and written a single word. Burgundy, next to it, in smaller letters, was a note. Soil sample 47B limestone content astonishing. Potential for Pinot Noir. A secret project. A gift for my Maggie. The queen of grapes for my queen. They stared at the map in stunned silence. Arthur, the dreamer, had apparently discovered a terroir on their land that could potentially grow one of the world's most finicky and celebrated grapes. He must have been waiting for the right time, the right resources to surprise her. His early death had buried the secret with him. The discovery was more than just a potential new wine, it was a profound, symbolic gift. It was Arthur's voice, speaking to them across time, reasserting the vineyard's purpose. Not just to produce wine, but to nurture dreams, to hold secrets, to be a gift of love. For Maggie, it completely dissolved her quiet fear of irrelevance. Arthur had left her a project, a final collaboration. She was the only one with the experience and skill to potentially realize his dream. The Queen of Grapes awaited its queen. For Chloe, it was the final severing of Alexander's shadow. This child would be born into this legacy. Not of scandal and greed, but of hidden love letters, a father's hopeful journal, and a grandfather's dream waiting underground. This was their true inheritance. The next morning, the three of them, Maggie, Chloe, and Daniel, walked out to the rocky, overlooked corner of the property. Maggie bent down, scooped up a handful of the thin, stony soil, and let it run through her fingers. Well, Arthur, she said softly, a determined smile gracing her lips, let's see what you found for us. The next chapter of Thorne Vineyards had begun. It wasn't about defense or survival anymore. It was about potential. It was about a child soon to be born, a secret plot of land soon to be planted, and a love story, both old and new, that was still being written into the very soil of the place they called home. The vineyard was no longer just a business or a legacy. It was a living, breathing member of their family, and it had just given them its greatest gift. The discovery of Arthur's journal and the secret map was more than a revelation. It was a seismic shift in the very soul of Thorne Vineyards. The past had reached out and gently, but firmly oriented them toward a future they had never dared to imagine. The rocky, neglected plot of land was no longer a forgotten corner. It was hallowed ground, a posthumous collaboration between a visionary husband and the wife who had carried his dream forward. The project was christened with quiet solemnity, Arthur's Plot. It became their shared obsession, a purposeful diversion from the anxious joy of Chloe's pregnancy. While her body changed and grew a new life, they would work the stubborn earth, preparing it for a different kind of birth. The first task was the most backbreaking, soil amendment. Arthur's note about the limestone content was correct, a fantastic base for Pinot Noir, but the soil was poor and thin. Days were spent hauling loads of organic compost and specific mycorrhizal fungi to encourage root growth. Daniel's scientific mind took the lead here, meticulously calculating ratios, while Maggie's hands, which knew the feel of good earth, judged the blend. Chloe, her pregnancy now showing in a gentle curve, directed the operation from a folding chair under a wide-brimmed hat, her laptop balanced on her knees, researching Burgundian techniques and sourcing the perfect clone of Pinot Noir vines. It was during this time that the outside world, which had rallied to them against Blackthorn, began to knock gently on their door again. The viral video had made them icons. They started receiving letters, real handwritten letters, not just from well-wishers, but from people seeking something. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Isabel, who had inherited a small, derelict apple orchard in the Hudson Valley from her grandfather. A developer was pressuring her to sell. Her letter was an echo of Chloe's own desperate tone from months before. "I don't know what to do," she wrote. "I'm not a farmer, I'm a school teacher. But I can't be the one who sells his dream." Maggie handed the letter to Chloe without a word. Chloe read it, her eyes misting. She remembered the feeling of being utterly alone against a Goliath. "We have to help her," Chloe said, her voice firm. "How?" Daniel asked gently. "We can't fight every battle." "Not by fighting," Chloe said, the idea forming as she spoke. "By teaching. We didn't just need a lawyer against Blackthorn. We needed a community. What if we could be that community for others?" That was the seed of the Thorne Vineyards Legacy Fellowship. It was Chloe's brainchild, a program offering 2-week residencies to individuals, like Isabel, who were trying to save a small, inherited family agricultural business. The fellows would come to the vineyard, not for a vacation, but for a practicum. Maggie would teach the fundamentals of traditional cultivation and the intangible instinct of a grower. Daniel would cover the modern science of soil health and sustainable pest management. Chloe would teach them how to tell their story, how to build a brand, and the brutal basics of business planning and digital marketing. They would work alongside them in the fields and the tasting room. In return, the fellows would pay a nominal fee, just enough to cover their room and board, and contribute their labor to the vineyard. The first cohort was small: Isabel, the apple orchard teacher, a young couple trying to save a century-old, family-owned dairy farm from going under, and a soft-spoken man who had inherited a neglected pecan grove in Georgia. The vineyard, once a solely family-centric universe, suddenly hummed with new energy. The presence of the fellows was invigorating. Isabel, in particular, attached herself to the project of Arthur's plot, finding a sense of purpose in hauling compost that mirrored her own struggle to save her legacy. Maggie, initially wary of sharing her sacred space with strangers, found herself unexpectedly renewed. Teaching forced her to articulate knowledge that was second nature to her, to break down a lifetime of experience into digestible lessons. She saw her own journey reflected in the anxious, determined faces of her students. She was no longer just a vintner. She was a mentor, passing the torch her husband had lit. Daniel thrived in the role of the calm, knowledgeable scientist, translating complex data into practical advice. And Chloe, her belly swelling, became the heart of the operation, the charismatic organizer who drew everyone together for shared meals on the porch, where stories and strategies were exchanged late into the night. The fellowship became a second vineyard, a parallel harvest of hope and shared purpose. The fellows left not just with notes, but with a renewed sense of confidence and a permanent place in the Thorne Vineyard's extended family. Isabel left with a concrete plan to turn her orchard into a pick-your-own destination and press artisanal cider. The dairy farmers began exploring the idea of value-added products like small-batch cheese. As Chloe entered her third trimester, Arthur's plot was finally ready. The soil was rich and alive. The carefully sourced Pinot Noir vines, fragile-looking things compared to the hardy Cabernet and Zinfandel vines, were delivered. The planting was turned into a ceremony. All the past fellows were invited back. Together with Maggie, Chloe, Daniel, and the entire vineyard staff, they planted the first 100 vines. It was a silent, sacred act. Each vine was placed in the ground with a prayer, a hope, a memory of Arthur. Maggie planted the very first one, her hands, wrinkled and strong, gently firming the earth around its base. "There you go, Arthur," she whispered, her voice catching. "Your dream is in the ground." The completion of the planting coincided with the final days of Chloe's pregnancy. The frantic energy of the project gave way to a watchful, waiting calm. The vineyard seemed to hold its breath. Elara Margaret Rossi was born on a cool, clear autumn morning, just as the first light was touching the rows of vines. Her first cries were not the wails of a newborn, but a strong, indignant sound that made the exhausted Chloe and the weeping Daniel laugh through their tears. When Maggie held her granddaughter for the first time, The final piece of her world clicked into place. She looked at the tiny, perfect face and then out the window at the vineyard, now touched with the gold of the rising sun. She saw the rows of Cabernet, the new Blaufränkisch slope, and in the distance, the young, vulnerable Pinot Noir vines of Arthur's plot. This child would never know the grandfather who dreamed her into this world, but she would walk the land he had loved. She would taste the wine from the vines they had planted for her. She would be surrounded by the stories of resilience, not just of her family, but of all the families who had come to their porch seeking hope. The threats had been real. The con man, the corporation. The struggles were ongoing. The relentless work, the fear of failure, the challenge of blending old and new. But holding Alara, Maggie understood these were not the whole story. They were merely the pruning, the necessary hardship that encouraged the strongest, most fruitful growth. The legacy of Thorne Vineyards was no longer just in the bottle. It was in the fellowship, in the shared knowledge, in the community they had built. It was in the secret plot of land that held a husband's love letter to his wife, written in the language of the earth. And now, it was in the fierce, hungry cry of a new generation, announcing her arrival to the world she would one day inherit. Maggie kissed Alara's forehead. The future was no longer a fearful unknown. It was a vintage they would craft together, year by year, season by season, story by story. And she knew, with a certainty as deep as the limestone in Arthur's plot, that it would be their finest yet. The arrival of Alara Margaret Rossi was not just an addition to the family. It was a recalibration of the universe at Thorne Vineyards. The relentless, forward-driving energy that had defined the past few years, the fight for survival, the battle against corporations, the feverish planting of new dreams, softened into a slower, more profound rhythm. It was the rhythm of a rocking chair on the porch at midnight, the rhythm of a baby's breath, the deep, patient rhythm of the earth itself, which understands that all things of value require time. Maggie found herself experiencing the vineyard anew through the lens of grandmotherhood. Her morning walks, once a solitary ritual of inspection and intuition, were now conducted with Alara strapped to her chest. She would point out the budding tendrils on the Zinfandel vines, whisper the names of birds, and explain the morning due to the wide-eyed, silent infant. It was a silent monologue of love and legacy, a passing on of knowledge in its purest, most instinctual form. She wasn't teaching, she was simply sharing her world. Chloe's transformation was equally profound. The fiery, sometimes brittle determination that had armored her through crisis melted into a softer, more resilient strength. Her focus bifurcated. Part of her was still the savvy CEO of a growing brand, managing the orders for Phoenix Red that still poured in, and overseeing the legacy fellowship applications that now came from all over the country. The other part was wholly, blissfully absorbed in the mesmerizing details of her daughter, the shape of her ears, the surprising strength of her grip, the milky scent of her skin. The vineyard was her life's work, but Alara was her soul's work. Daniel slotted into this new existence with a quiet, unwavering competence. He was a natural father, his calm demeanor a steady anchor for Chloe's new mother anxieties and a gentle counterpoint to Maggie's seasoned, sometimes fervent, grandmotherly advice. His role at the vineyard evolved too. With Maggie more devoted to Alara and the fellowship, and Chloe splitting her time, Daniel became the operational heart, the one who kept the intricate machine of the vineyard running day to day. He loved it, it was his way of building a cradle for his new family. The Legacy Fellowship, meanwhile, had taken on a life of its own. The story of the Thorns, their victory, their generosity, had become a beacon. They selected 4 fellows per season now, and the program was meticulously structured. Mornings were for hands-on work, Maggie teaching pruning techniques in the Cabernet block, Daniel demonstrating soil pH testing. Afternoons were for story sessions with Chloe, who helped them distill their personal history into a compelling narrative for their branding. Even little Alara was a part of it, often napping in a bassinet in the corner of the tasting room during meetings, a living symbol of the future they were all fighting for. It was during one of these sessions that a new, subtle challenge emerged, not from outside, but from within their newfound paradise. A new fellow had arrived, a man named Leo. He was in his 50s, a former corporate lawyer who had burned out and inherited a small, struggling olive grove from an uncle in Paso Robles. He was intelligent, eager, and intensely analytical. He listened to Maggie's intuitive teachings with a respectful but slightly skeptical ear. He gravitated toward Daniel, speaking the language of data and projections. One afternoon, during a discussion about the financial viability of small batch production, Leo turned to Chloe. You've done an incredible job building the Thorn brand, he said, not unkindly. But it's largely built on a powerful narrative. The phoenix rising from the ashes, the matriarchal triumph. It's brilliant marketing, but narratives can only scale so far. For real, long-term growth, you need to think about operational efficiency, market saturation, perhaps even considering acquisition offers to expand the brand's reach. The room went very quiet. The other fellows looked uncomfortable. The word acquisition hung in the air like a foul smell. It was Alexander's word. It was Blackthorn's word. Chloe's smile was tight. Our narrative isn't marketing, Leo, it's our truth. This isn't a brand to be scaled. It's a home to be tended. Leo backed down immediately, but the seed had been planted. Over the following days, Maggie noticed him watching them. He watched Daniel haul irrigation lines instead of automating them. He watched Maggie taste a grape and declare the harvest date instead of relying on bricks measurements. He saw the immense, loving, but inefficient investment of time and soul. He wasn't malicious. He was just from a different world. A world of PowerPoints and profit margins, where love was not a quantifiable metric. His presence became a low-grade irritant, a pebble in the shoe of their contentment. He represented a pressure they thought they'd escaped, the pressure to become something bigger, something more professional, something other than what they were. The tension came to a head over Arthur's plot. The Pinot Noir vines were fragile, demanding. They required agonizingly precise care. Leo, after studying the investment of time and resources for a wine that would not see a bottle for at least 5 years, presented Daniel with a spreadsheet. The ROI on this plot is projected to be negative for a decade, if ever, he said, as if he were delivering a legal brief. The capital, and more importantly, the thousands of person-hours being poured into it, are a significant drain. Wouldn't those resources be better allocated to expanding the production of Phoenix Red, which has proven demand and a faster turnaround? Daniel, usually unflappable, felt a cold anger. It's not about ROI. It's about a promise. A promise to a ghost, Leo said gently, believing he was being rational. That evening, Daniel told Maggie and Chloe about the conversation. Maggie felt a cold fear clutch her heart. This was the insidious version of their previous battles. It wasn't a villain to be defeated. It was a logic to be resisted. It was the world telling them, politely and rationally, that their dreams were inefficient. Chloe was silent for a long time, rocking a sleeping Alara. She looked out at the vineyard, then down at her daughter's face. He's not entirely wrong, she said finally, her voice quiet. Both Maggie and Daniel stared at her in shock. She continued, not about Arthur's plot. Never about that, but about the pressure. The fellowship, the demand for Phoenix, the new vines were trying to do everything. We're trying to be a family, a sanctuary, a business, and a school. What if we can't? What if we break? It was the first time she had given voice to the fear they all felt. The fear that their hard-won peace was precariously balanced, that in their desire to do good and be everything to everyone, they might lose the essential, fragile thing that made them them. The next day, Chloe did something she hadn't done in a long time. She took the morning off. She left Alara with Maggie, didn't check her email, and walked alone down to Arthur's plot. She sat on the ground between the young, vulnerable vines, her fingers tracing the delicate leaves. She thought about her father's journal entry. We might not leave her money, but we will leave her a world. What world were they leaving for Alara? A world of frantic hustle and endless obligations. Or a world of purposeful, joyful work? She returned to the house with a new resolve. She called a family meeting with Maggie and Daniel. We've been fighting the world for so long, we started to think we had to conquer it, she said. We don't, we just have to tend our own vine. Our first duty is to this family and to this land. Not to the fellowship, not to the brand, not to the story. She proposed a change. They would reduce the fellowship to 2 fellows per season. They would cap the production of Phoenix Red, making it a truly limited, allocated wine. They would stop trying to grow for growth's sake. We will be small, Chloe declared, her voice firm. We will be intentional, we will be excellent, and we will be happy. That is the legacy we leave for Alara. It was a strategic retreat that felt like the greatest victory of all. They were choosing their life over their legend. They told Leo their decision at the end of his fellowship. He listened, and to their surprise, he smiled, a genuine, warm smile. You know, he said, in my old life I would have advised against that. It's not the optimal financial path. But watching you all, I think I finally understand what terroir really means. It's not just about the soil. It's about the soul. You've chosen to protect yours, I respect that. His words were the final affirmation. They weren't failing, they were succeeding on their own terms. That night, Maggie went to the nursery. Alara was awake, cooing softly at the mobile of blown glass grapes spinning above her crib. Maggie picked her up and carried her to the window. Look, my little vine, she whispered, pointing into the moonlit night. See, that's your world. It's not the biggest, it's not the richest, but it's tended with love, every single inch of it. The vineyard slept under the stars, peaceful and complete. The Cabernet, the Blaufränkisch, the vulnerable Pinot Noir, each had its place. The world beyond could have its scale and its efficiency. Thorn Vineyards would have its love, its family, and its peace. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything.